So my next speaker has a job, and I'm sure we'll handle it very well. How the Second Amendment got me into politics as a teenager. Braxton Mitchell, state representative from Montana. Braxton, come on up. You get to follow Christian. Would you like the handheld, or do you want the podium? You're good? Okay.
Not sure how I topped that last speech there, man. Good afternoon. My name is Braxton Mitchell. I'm 25 years old and currently serving in my third term in the Montana House of Representatives. I ran for office at just 19 years old and flipped a Democrat-held seat by over 20 points. I was sworn in the following January at 20 years old, and at the time became the second youngest lawmaker in the state of Montana. This legislative session, my colleagues elected me to serve as a majority whip of the Montana House, and I was appointed by the Speaker of the House to chair the House Agriculture Committee. I grew up in rural northwestern Montana, raised by my great-grandparents, two of the hardest working people I've ever met. My great-grandparents, grandparents, and family have all been in the cattle processing industry for over 80 years this year, which is pretty much what I grew up working in from a pretty young age. One of the first lessons my great-grandpa taught me was about firearms, and not just how to shoot, but how to respect a gun and handle it safely. He was a hunter safety instructor for years, teaching kids across our county about responsibility, respect, and discipline when it comes to firearms. My grandpa is an expert marksman, the kind of guy who can pretty much hit anything consistently from 1,000+ yards and keeps his shots in very tight little groups. He likes to go out to eastern Montana a lot and do some prairie dog shooting, and I don't even know how he hits what he hits from the distance that he does. In our garage growing up sat probably the most sophisticated reloading bench I'd ever seen. Watched from a young age, carefully measure powder, see bullets, and fine-tune every round by hand. He taught me about the NRA from a young age, and not the political organization that you hear about today, but what it was when he got involved as a teenager back in the probably early 50s, mid-50s, which I'm sure most of you in the room know about, that the NRA was more about marksmanship, it was about training, and it was about safety, and it wasn't necessarily about politics or anything partisan whatsoever. Sorry, I lost my spot there. Those early lessons left a mark on me. It taught me that the Second Amendment wasn't just words on a piece of paper, that it was a way of life. And firearms weren't something to fear, but they were tools for hunting, for protection, and for preserving the independence that generations before us have fought to secure. For myself personally, my political journey started back in high school in 2018 during the end of my senior year. That February, America watched one of the most horrific tragedies in modern American history unfold, and that was a shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. On February 14, 2018, an individual opened fire, killing 17 people, mostly students, and wounding another 17. The grief and outrage was felt across the nation, and almost overnight, students began organizing nationwide walkouts, where millions of young people were walking out of class, demanding sweeping gun control, and in many cases, calling for the complete and total repeal of the Second Amendment itself. Even in my small high school in northwestern Montana, school administrators and student groups were pushing us to join the walkout. They called it action and change, but to me it felt very one-sided. Because as I looked around, I didn't see anyone speaking up for the other side. I didn't see anyone defending our rights. I didn't see anyone reminding the people of the millions of law-abiding Americans that safely own and use firearms every day, and that we shouldn't lose our rights because of the actions of a few. So I decided to do something about it. I told my buddies, the same guys that I'd grown up with, whether it was shooting, hunting, or learning firearm safety from, as far back as I could remember, I told them, hey, we're pro-gun. We grew up with this heritage. If they're going to walk out to call for gun control, then we're going to do a walkout too, but to defend the Second Amendment. It took some encouragement because a lot of students were nervous about how the school might react or what teachers might say. They were worried about being singled out or graded differently, but I reminded them that if we stayed silent, the only voices that were going to be heard were the ones that were calling for our rights to be taken away. And slowly, one by one, they agreed to stand with us. When the day of the walkout came, I knew we had a pretty good-sized group of friends who were 100% committed to standing with us. But once it started and kids started coming out of class, more and more students joined in. And before long, our group completely outnumbered the anti-gun walkout. And what was supposed to be a one-sided protest turned into a strong show of support for the Second Amendment. And before the walkout, I contacted every local media network I could find across the country, and across my county and across Montana, to make sure that our side of the story got heard. Because at the time, the news across the entire country was just wall-to-wall coverage of students that were planning to walk out and protest and call for gun control and the repeal of the Second Amendment. But we heard nothing at all, again, from the opposite side standing to support Second Amendment rights. And fortunately, local media covered it. Local TV stations, newspapers, and radio all picked up our side of the story. And suddenly, our small group of students became a part of the national conversation. And that's when we learned something else, that standing up for truth comes with a cost. The backlash was immediate. Our own teachers attacked us on social media. Some mocked us by name. Others accused us of being insensitive or political extremists. Hardly any of us even knew anything about politics. Again, it was just, standing up for the Second Amendment. And the school district took zero action to defend us whatsoever, even as we were being personally targeted by the adults who were supposed to guide us. Fortunately, the late Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA were one of the few who actually came in to defend us at a time when we felt vulnerable, just a handful of students standing up, again, for our Second Amendment rights. Charlie and others gave us encouragement, amplified our story, and reminded us that we weren't alone. A quick note on that, I actually ended up getting involved with Turning Point USA later that summer. First time for myself ever getting on a plane. It was held in Washington, D.C., and had a very incredible experience. And I've been fortunate enough to attend every national Turning Point event, USA event ever since then. And in 2019, I became an ambassador for Turning Point USA. I guess a little side note, you're definitely going to miss Charlie, and these last 2 weeks have been pretty tough. Charlie and I became pretty good friends in 2019 when I became an ambassador for his organization. And I was down at his funeral last weekend, and being there reminded me just how much of an impact that he had on my life, and seeing the response in the crowd and from across the world, frankly, just shows how much of an impact he had on others as well. It was emotional, but also renewed my resolve to keep fighting for the values that he stood for. And a quick quote from Charlie that's recently resurfaced since his assassination that's kind of really stuck with me recently, especially when I was putting the speech together. And here's what Charlie said. "Bad people will always exist, and yes, lives will tragically be lost. But the answer is to never give up on the one right that protects all others. The Second Amendment is worth defending, even when it's hard, because without it, none of the rest of our freedoms mean anything." Charlie Kirk. And I believe with everything in me that even though Charlie's life was taken by a bullet, by an assassin's bullet, he would still be standing here today to tell us to fight for the Second Amendment. He would remind us that the evil act of one person does not erase the God-given rights of millions of law-abiding Americans. He would tell us that freedom is always worth defending, no matter the cost, and to give that up, and to give up our rights because of a tragedy would let evil win twice. Back to 2018, so towards the end of my senior year, just a few weeks after we had done that walkout, a few of my buddies and I decided we weren't going to stop with the walkout. We wanted to take it a step further and made an even bigger statement. So we made the decision to organize a full-on pro-gun rally in our county. As a group of teenagers, we had to pretty much jump through every hoop you could think of, whether finding a venue, dealing with permits, fundraising, getting insurance, and all that. As teenagers, wasn't very friendly either, but we stuck with it. We worked nights and weekends for a few weeks there, made a lot of phone calls, and we were able to raise a few $1,000 to make it happen. When that day finally came, we had more than 500 people that showed up, whether it was kids, students from our school, whether there's parents, veterans, law enforcement. They all stood by in support of the Second Amendment. And the message we really want to get out was simple, and it was that the generations before us that carried this fight for freedom, but we are here to carry it forward. And we wanted them to show that not all young people in this country are being indoctrinated and want to call for the repeal of the Second Amendment, but there are still young people in this country that support the Second Amendment. And that rally definitely made a statement. It showed our community, and frankly our entire state, that this issue still matters deeply, and that the next generation isn't going to sit back and watch our rights be chipped away. So this experience, organizing the walkout, standing up to the backlash, and seeing the difference it made is ultimately what led me into a path of getting into politics at a young age. About a year or so after that walkout, give or take, I got a call from someone who I kind of known personally growing up, and it was a man who was going to become the chairman of the Republican Party for the state of Montana. He told me that if he had won the chairmanship, which he later did that summer, that one of his biggest priorities would be to flip the legislative district that I had lived in growing up, a district that had been held narrowly by a Democrat for years. I'm sure Attorney General Knudsen could probably tell you how tight that seat was when he was the Speaker of the House at the time. I was then asked something that kind of really caught me off guard, and it was Don Kaye's name asking if I would run for that seat. I was only 19 years old in college, working, and just going about my normal life. And suddenly I was being asked to put my name on a ballot and fight for the values that I just spent the last year defending. It wasn't an easy decision. I knew it would be a lot of work, and that it would mean opening up myself to a lot more criticism and attacks like we had experienced, for instance, from our teachers when we were in school. And that people more than 3 times my age would be gunning for the same seat. That was definitely fun. But I also knew that this was my chance to do a lot more than just talk about my beliefs, and it was my chance to act. After a lot of prayer and encouragement from friends like Charlie, from sitting legislators, and from community members in my own family, I made the decision to toss my hat in the ring. What followed was an intense and extremely expensive campaign season. We knocked thousands of doors pretty much every day after work for quite a few months there, and every weekend was met just talking to voters face to face. And again, we worked day in and day out to share our message. In the end, as I mentioned in the open, all the hard work paid off, and we were able to flip that Democrat-held seat by more than 20 percentage points. Since being in the legislature, I've really worked to kind of diversify the legislation I carry. I focus on many different aspects of policy, everything from veterans to social policy to protecting free speech and securing our elections. In Montana, we're pretty gun-friendly, so it's kind of hard to really pass any more pro-gun legislation. But one bill that I did run this year was a pro-gun bill. So Montana, we're one of the many states that currently have strong local preemption laws in the books to keep cities and counties from passing their own gun restrictions. But I saw a potential loophole. I know there's been some discussions about this today, but I saw a potential loophole that concerned me. So during the Biden administration, they have been offering federal grants to localities to implement red flag laws. And I knew that if we didn't potentially close this loophole, that we could, again, potentially wake up one day with federal dollars funding backdoor gun confiscation programs, even in a state like Montana. So just to be it safe, I sponsored House Bill 809, which made Montana one of the first states in the nation to ban red flag laws. And under House Bill 809, no court, no state agency, no city or no county, or no law enforcement officer in the state can enforce, recognize, or attempt to carry out a red flag law order in any jurisdiction within the state. And we put a lot of teeth in the bill. Any public official who tries to enforce a red flag order in any way faces strong civil penalties. Because in Montana, the government does not get to take away your rights without due process. And I'm glad that groups like the NRA came in strong support of this common sense bill. And, on red flag laws, the Constitution is clear. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Yet red flag laws do exactly that. They strip citizens of their rights, their property, and their dignity, often before they've ever been charged with a crime. If the government can seize your firearms on the basis of accusation, then no right is safe. Today, it's your Second Amendment rights. Tomorrow, it could be your free speech, your property, or your right to worship, like we saw during COVID. We cannot allow that precedent to stand, not in Montana, not anywhere else in the country. I'm definitely lucky to live in a state like Montana where we already have some of the strongest pro-gun protections in the nation. We have constitutional carry, we have state preemption, federal noncompliance, which basically makes it clear that Montana law enforcement will not help enforce any new federal gun bans or restrictions. Even our own state constitution explicitly protects the right to keep and bear arms. And we also have the Firearms Freedom Act, which back in 2019 was implemented, which at the time led the nation by declaring that firearms, ammunition, and accessories made and kept in Montana should be free from federal overreach. When you put all this together, from our state constitution, preemption laws, and House Bill 809, you'll see that Montana is leading the nation in the Second Amendment fight. And with that, that's my story and how I got into politics at such a young age. So thank you.